In this comparative study, I will explore the similarities and differences of the emergence of the auteur and the auteur theory, specifically within the constraints of the studio system. The two films I will be discussing are The Royal Tenenbaums, directed by Wes Anderson, and Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick. The chosen area of film focus is specifically auteur theory. I'll be looking into the film techniques, symbolism, visual style, and character development, which has enabled these directors to become auteurs in a highly controlled, big-budget studio environment. In The Royal Tenenbaums, the main themes are family dysfunctionality and loneliness, setting Wes Anderson's unique interpretation of a perfect New York City. It tells the story of an abandoned child prodigies, Chas, Margaret, who is adopted, and Richie by their father Royal. In contrast, Eyes Wide Shut explores the protagonist Bill's obsession with a secret code in high society, his dilemma between good and bad, and his exploration of the consequences of taking part in high society orgies. Auteur theory originated during the French New Wave era in the late 1950s. The theory highlights the director's personal artistic visions, unique style, recurrent motives, and techniques, rejecting the formalism of the studio system. The French New Wave era rebelled against past forms of storytelling that relied on strict plotline, freedom of camera movements, natural lighting, and jump cuts. The auteur theory is characterized by their unique and recognizable artistic vision, reflected in their films. For example, you know it's a Wes Anderson movie when you see chapter-like structure and recurring theme of dysfunctionality. Similarly, you know it's a Kubrick film when the use of one-point perspective and frequent use of symmetry, he creates a tension between wonder and terror. There's a constant mix between the right and the wrong, and it lets us see more about the world that we are entering. Both of these films exhibit various representations of dysfunctionalities. However, both directors come from different eras, and they have different advantages and disadvantages from the constraints of the studio system. Stanley Kubrick transformed his ideas into critically acclaimed masterpieces. However, Kubrick faced budgetary constraints due to his perfectionist nature, leading to problems with studios and exhausted performers. Wes Anderson's films feature his signature stylized visuals and color palettes. He typically works with the same cast who are familiar with his style and process. Both directors overcome these constraints as they are widely known for their work, as each of their films is visually attractive and unique. The Royal Tenenbaums is a comedy drama that represents a unique moment in American independent filmmaking, distinct from typical Hollywood storytelling set in 1976 New York. The film explored themes of nostalgia and identity, reflecting Anderson's personal vision. Eyes Wide Shut is a psychological drama. It features haunting imagery and dreamlike sequences, and explores sexual obsession and the dark underworld of a secret society. The film follows a successful doctor who becomes obsessed with his wife's adulterous desires, leading him into a mysterious and exclusive sexual cult. Although both auteurs share a passion for film, they come from different eras. For example, Kubrick was active during the French New Wave era, when most directors lacked funding and had to make films with limited resources. Kubrick adapted to this environment and developed a distinctive style that reflected the era's resourcefulness. In contrast, Anderson was born into an era with established directors like Spielberg, Lucas, Tarantino, and others, who had already built the auteur theory in the studio system. Anderson's style was influenced by these past directors, including Hitchcock and Kubrick, who paved the way for his success and many others. Kubrick extended the film shooting for over 46 weeks and called actors back for reshoots, demonstrating his level of control over the project. Wes Anderson's use of chapter structure in his films is a notable aspect of his auteur style. This technique not only adds a unique touch to his films, but also pays homage to his literary influences, J.D. Salinger and Kurt Vonnegut, two of Anderson's favorite authors, who often use similar structure techniques in their writing. Anderson's use of chapters provides a sense of cohesion and structure to his film, which often have complex storylines and an array of quirky characters. Overall, Anderson's use of chapter structure in his films is not only a nod to his literary influences, but also a crucial aspect of his auteur style. As previously mentioned, both auteurs come from different eras, therefore they have had difference between their works, how they have discovered their authorship, like visual comedy. Take Wes Anderson as an example. Most of Wes Anderson's films have a comedic tone when what's being exposed is something serious. For this film, he wanted to have a more serious tone. He wanted to have a more ambitious film on an emotional level. But in this film, it's more directly connected with family issues that are deeply personal, emotional, and serious. For example, the kids are presented as adults in kids' bodies due to the family issues they have. Let's take Chas, for example. He's a business prodigy. His closet is formal outwear. When he becomes an adult, his closet changes into tracksuits. This is because he's always on the run of chaos and is indulging this fear on his kids. Therefore, he has this distance and remorse to his father. This presents how family dysfunctionality creates this world, where the kids need to be the adults of the house because the parents can't be there, because their marital problems are far more important than their kids. Whereas Kubrick uses visual comedy in certain scenes that can be seen as uncomfortable or awkward situations that Bill is placed in. However, this can be argued because the film wants to portray the secret desire that he wants after hearing his wife's confession of her considering an extramarital affair. Visual comedy is portrayed when Bill is placed in these awkward situations when he is called to one of his special Shane's apartment, where he encounters Marion, who claims that she is in love with him. However, they barely know each other, and her father's corpse is like 6 feet away, and I think it is important to notice how Marion's husband is literally a clone of Dr. Bill. Through this exposition, Kubrick uses context of the scene in order to create a visual comedy that expresses dark humor. Overall, both authors present visual comedy and the studio constraints through the visual comedy and how they want the viewer to see and how others want to have a deeper understanding of the family issues. Wes Anderson's creative background is rooted in his love for storytelling and cinema, often incorporating idiosyncratic characters, whimsical settings, and deadpan humor into his works. Anderson's films featuring highly stylized production design, symmetrical framing, and a signature color palette. Stanley's creative background is marked by his extensive knowledge of cinema and his singular vision as a filmmaker. He started as a photographer, gave him experience in composition, lighting, and visual storytelling. Kubrick later moved into filmmaking, where he earned a reputation for his meticulous attention to detail. His films are characterized by their cerebral and thought-provoking themes, intricate production design, and often controversial subject matter. In Eyes Wide Shut, the camera captures Bill's desperation for sexual encounters in awkward situations, creating tension between Bill, the camera, and the setting. He meets a woman who flirts with him, and Kubrick's trademark of using extreme close-ups to emphasize character emotions and reactions is evident in the scene. These shots focuses on the characters' faces, highlighting the expressions and reactions to unfolding events. Wes Anderson utilizes symmetry to frame shots as prominent visual element throughout the film. Anderson's use of tracking shots at the beginning of the film establishes the main location and presents the characters in a loving, caring atmosphere. The dollhouse shots show different characters in various locations as the camera moves along in a panorama style, efficiently establishing the settings and the character interactions. Both actors use their specific directing styles and have made their work visually unique and unmistakable. Arguably, Wes Anderson, coming from an artistic background, commonly would have a more perfectionist eye and attention to detail than Kubrick, as he wasn't known for being a perfectionist, but rather was known for going above and beyond to get that character's emotions. As mentioned earlier, Eyes Wide Shut holds the Guinness World Record for the longest continuous film shot, which may explain why it's considered to be one of Kubrick's best films, as he was, to a certain extent, a perfectionist. The fact that the studio trusted Kubrick enough so completely is a demonstration of his reputation for being a director who demands absolute control, not just from himself, but from the cast. Wes Anderson has a distinctive style that can be observed, where he employs motifs and symbolism to explore complex themes and ideas. However, Anderson uses the motif of family dysfunction throughout the film to depict the flaws of the Tenenbaum family. This motif is emphasized in all of his films, but in this film especially, it is emphasized through the repetition as each member of the family grapples with their own issues, while also exploring the ways in which their functionality is connected. Anderson's repetition reinforces the motives and highlights its pervasive nature throughout the family's lives. For example, the falcon symbolizes the family's past and represents happier times before their dysfunction became overwhelming. Both films exhibit various traits and characteristics that showcase the different creative art styles that make them prime examples of authors. Both authors come from different eras. Kubrick, for one, learned and was there when the auteur theory had an emergence, and he developed his own creative and artistic style, whereas Wes Anderson did not have this difficulty to immerse himself into the auteur theory and find his authorship, as there were already these famous directors that already had found their authorship. So in a way, Anderson did not have a difficult time, as Kubrick and others had, with studio constraints, such as building their own sets, working with the same cast, and shooting a scene over and over again, as they all showed they had the capacity to make the studio companies trust in them. Therefore, Anderson, with this era of legendary directors behind him, he did not struggle. Rather, he easily found inspiration in these directors to find his own unique style. However, in my personal opinion, the auteur theory is showcased in both films, but the one that I think represents it the most is Eyes Wide Shut and The Shining, which expresses the authorship of Kubrick in a more perfectionist way. For example, in The Shining, where he showed his artistic vision, he let horror and exhaustion lead the acting in a film. By reshooting a scene 127 times, which made Wendy Torrance seem exhausted, it was not acting, as she was enduring a trauma response. Another example is the orgy scene. This scene was censored in the US to avoid an NC-17 rating. This meant that there was a need to do some editing in order to not get the censorship, and people would still be able to get all the glory that this movie has to offer. I think that Kubrick has a particular way to express his authorship and how he manipulates the studio to do the things he wants to do, such as building a New York City and its streets and neighbors in England, or him having the record for the longest continuous film shot. I consider this only makes Kubrick one of the best directors, even with the problems and obsessiveness over controlling and being a perfectionist. I think he has being one of the greatest contributions to the art of cinema. His style has revolutionized cinema and has made directors and auteurs to find their voice. The emergence of the auteur and the auteur theory marked significantly in the French New Wave era, which inspired many filmmakers, two of them being Stanley Kubrick and Wes Anderson. However, the studio system always prioritizes financial success over details and perfection. But these two directors have proved to studios that it's possible to have a formalist style, which both Kubrick and Anderson exploited successfully to create intricate, complex, and multi-layered films. Stanley Kubrick and Wes Anderson are two highly regarded directors known for their distinctive style and creative visions. Both have faced their fair share of obstacles and limitations from the studios that may have impacted their directional ambitions. Kubrick is known for being a perfectionist and having complete creative control over his films. However, this wasn't always the case, as he faced numerous challenges from studios during his career. One of the biggest obstacles he faced was the censorship, like Eyes Wide Shut, also seen in Clockwork Orange. Both were given artistic freedom by their respective studios because they have had a record of creating critically acclaimed and successful films. These successes have given them leverage with their studios, allowing them to negotiate for greater creative control over these projects. However, it is important to acknowledge that both directors have low-budget films, which reduces the financial risk for studios. Overall, I think that Kubrick is a highly influential person who inspired many, including Wes Anderson. Anderson's films are widely known for technical precision, innovation, and challenging traditional narrative structure. Anderson's style is surely often compared to Kubrick as they have similar techniques, such as symmetry, long takes, tracking shots, and others, which is why many critics note the influence that Kubrick has on Anderson's work.